I'm Chloe, 28 years old, and for many years my parents told every employer in town that I was a thief. For 3 years I couldn't get hired anywhere in my town. Not because I lacked qualifications. I graduated magna cum laude with a 3.8 GPA in accounting. I had glowing recommendations from professors. But none of that mattered because my father didn't just spread gossip, he used his multi-million-dollar corporate accounts to financially blackmail every employer in town into rejecting me. He said, "Maybe now you'll learn to respect us." He thought he'd broken me. He thought 3 years of rejection, 3 years of watching me scrub hotel toilets while he laughed, would bring me crawling back. He didn't know about the envelope. He didn't know about the blind trust my grandmother had legally ironclad 12 years ago, or why the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises was waiting for me. Before I continue, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know. Now let me take you back 3 years to the day I discovered what my own parents had done to me. The heavy glass door of Bennett Financial Group clicked shut, sealing me inside the interview room. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my 25th interview. 25 perfect handshakes, 25 flawless technical tests, and 25 sudden silent rejections. I sat across from the HR manager, a woman in her 60s with kind, tired eyes. I waited for her to praise my accounting degree, to smile and to tell me I was hired. Instead, she stood up, walked to the door and locked it. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. As an accountant, I was trained to look for patterns, to find the missing numbers on a balance sheet. Something in my life's ledger wasn't adding up. "Miss Sterling," she whispered, stepping away from the glass walls. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed my flawless resume back across the table. "I am going to tell you something I shouldn't. If you repeat it, I will deny it." "Okay," I choked out. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "You are brilliant," she said, her voice strained. "You are exactly who we want to hire. But you need to talk to your father." "My father?" The words tasted like ash. Richard Sterling owns Sterling Development, the biggest commercial construction company in the county. "His company holds multi-million-dollar accounts with almost every business in this town," she said, her eyes dropping to the floor. "Including ours. I can't say more. Just ask him why no one here can afford to hire you." The drive home was a blur of gray roads and blinding panic. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. A corporate blockade. My own father. He hadn't just watched me struggle, he had built the cage. I stormed into our massive 2-story colonial house. The silence inside was heavy, smelling of expensive floor wax and my mother's fresh flowers. I found my father in his study. The room was dim, lit only by a brass desk lamp. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing blueprints, a glass of scotch sweating on a leather coaster. "Dad," I said. My voice shook, but I forced my chin up. "I need to talk to you." He didn't look up. The scratch of his expensive pen continued. "Make it quick. Why can't I get a job?" The pen stopped. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his head. A small cruel smile crept onto his face. In that fraction of a second, staring into his cold dark eyes, the last piece of my childhood died. He wasn't my protector, he was my predator. "You called them," I whispered, taking a step back as if he had physically struck me. "You threatened them." He leaned back, picking up his scotch. The ice clinked against the glass, a sharp, lazy sound. "I simply had a chat with my banking partners. I told them the truth." "What truth?" My chest heaved. I felt like I was drowning. "That you stole from your own family," he said smoothly. "That you can't be trusted with money." "I paid that back," I screamed, the memory of those grueling college years flashing behind my eyes. I had used a family credit card for textbooks. $1,500. He had made me work 2 part-time jobs while studying just to pay him back. "I have the binder of receipts. You know those were for school." "Did you?" He took a slow sip of his drink. "That's not how I remember it. I remember a thief. And Sterling Development requires absolute trust in the banks we use. If they hire a known liability, I pull our corporate accounts. It's just business, Chloe." A shadow moved in the doorway. My mother, Evelyn. She stood there twisting her diamond ring, her face pale. "Mom," I gasped, pleading. Tell him what he's doing is insane." My mother's eyes flicked to my father, then to the floor. "Richard," she whispered weakly, "maybe we should." "Evelyn, this is between me and my daughter." His voice was a whip. She flinched and stepped back into the shadows, choosing her comfortable life over her daughter's survival. Her silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than his anger. My father stood up. He walked around the desk, his heavy footsteps sinking into the thick carpet. He stopped inches from me. I could smell the sharp tang of alcohol and peppermint on his breath. "You turned down my offer to work for me for free," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You thought you could be independent. You thought you could survive without my permission. Now you understand reality. You are nothing without me." I stared at the man who had given me life, realizing he would gladly destroy it just to prove he owned me. My bank account had barely $4,500 left, my rent was due, the walls of his trap were closing in, and I had nowhere left to run. The town felt like a locked room. Everywhere I went, doors quietly clicked shut. My father hadn't just ruined my career, he had poisoned the air I breathed. At the grocery store, neighbors who had known me since childhood suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating as I walked by. At the bank, the tellers stopped asking about my accounting degree. The whispers followed me like dry leaves scraping on pavement. "Did you hear about Richard's daughter? A thief. Such a shame. He never lied outright. He just planted a sick, twisted version of the truth. Knowing his money made him the loudest voice in town." I was running out of time. Every night, sitting at my tiny kitchen table, I ran the numbers. $4,500 in savings. Rent was $1,200. Utilities, cheap food, gas. My accounting brain tracked the exact day I would hit zero. It was a ticking clock inside my chest, a constant breathless panic. One morning, exhausted from another sleepless night, I walked into the local coffee shop. The bell above the door chimed, and there he was, Julian, my older brother, the golden child. He stood by the counter with his wealthy friends, spinning his BMW keys on his finger. He saw me freeze in the doorway. A familiar cruel spark lit up his eyes. "Well, look who it is," Julian called out. His voice was too loud, designed to cut through the quiet hum of the cafe. Every head turned. "Hey, little sister. Still looking for work?" I gripped my purse, my fingernails digging into the cheap leather. "Julian, please, not here." He laughed, a sharp barking sound just like our father's. "I heard Dad might have an opening in the mailroom." "Oh wait," he tapped his chin, performing for his friends. "We probably shouldn't put you near the petty cash register, right?" His friends snickered. The barista stopped wiping the counter, staring at me with wide eyes. My face burned with a heat so intense it brought tears to my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving my coffee behind. I could hear Julian's laughter echoing through the glass door as it swung shut. I had 3 months before I would starve. 3 months before I would have to crawl back to my father's giant silent house and become his obedient prisoner. I couldn't let that happen. That night, at 3 a.m., I found a job listing online. It was for the Maplewood Lodge, a run-down hotel on the county line, mostly used by tired truck drivers. It wasn't glamorous, but more importantly, it wasn't owned by anyone who played golf with my father. The next day I stood in the hotel's dim, bleach-smelling break room. The neon sign outside buzzed, casting a flickering pink light through the window. Across the metal table sat the manager, Brenda Walsh. She was in her 50s, with deep lines around her mouth, and eyes that had seen too many hard luck stories. Brenda stared at my application, tapping a pen against her coffee mug. She looked up, her gaze cutting right through my cheap interview suit. "Accounting degree," she read flatly. "GPA 3, magna cum laude," glowing references from a KPMG partner. She dropped the paper. "And you want to clean truck stop hotel rooms for minimum wage?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my hands perfectly still in my lap. "Why?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't like trouble, Miss Sterling. And a girl with your resume walking in here screams trouble." I could have lied. I could have invented a story about needing flexible hours. But I was suffocating under a mountain of my family's lies. I needed one real, honest moment. "Because my father has made sure no corporate office in this town will hire me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "He wants to starve me into coming home. I need to eat. I need to pay my rent. And I am not afraid of hard work." Brenda studied me for a long, agonizing minute. I braced myself. I waited for her to pick up the phone to call my father, to slam this final pathetic door in my face. Instead, she sighed and reached under the desk. She slid a folded pale blue polyester uniform across the table. It smelled permanently of industrial chemicals. "I don't care about rich town politics," Brenda said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I care if you show up at 5:30 a.m. sharp and get the mildew out of the grout in room 114. Shift starts tomorrow. Don't be late." For 7 months my life vanished into a blur of aching muscles and harsh chemicals. I scrubbed toilets until my shoulders burned. I scraped dried gum off carpets. The strong bleach cracked the skin on my hands, leaving them raw and bleeding. When I saw people from my town in the lobby, I hid in the dark supply closets, listening to my own ragged breathing in the dark until they passed. It was humiliating, but it was survival. It was money my father couldn't touch. Then came the Thursday night that broke me and rebuilt me. I was working a late shift, pushing my heavy, rattling supply cart down the third-floor corridor. The hotel had recently renovated its steakhouse, trying to attract a wealthier crowd. Soft jazz drifted up through the ventilation grates. And then, I heard it. A booming, self-satisfied laugh. My stomach dropped. The air in the hallway suddenly turned freezing cold. I pressed myself against the floral wallpaper, creeping forward to peek over the balcony into the restaurant below. There they were. My father in his custom charcoal suit. My mother in her pearls. Julian slouching in his chair, tapping on his phone. The hostess was leading them to a table directly in my line of sight. It wasn't a coincidence. My father had tracked me down. I tried to back away, to hide behind my cart, but it was too late. My father looked up. His dark eyes locked onto mine. He took in my wrinkled blue uniform, my messy hair, the yellow rubber gloves on my cracked, bleeding hands. A wide, triumphant grin spread across his face. It was the smile of a hunter watching a trapped animal give up. Well, my father announced, his voice carrying perfectly over the music. He nudged my mother and pointed straight up at me. Evelyn, look, our daughter found her true calling. My mother looked up. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, looking around frantically to see if anyone she knew was watching. Julian burst out laughing. Hey, Chloe. Julian yelled, leaning over the white tablecloth. You missed a spot in room 3112. The clinking of silverware stopped. Diners turned in their seats, staring up at the balcony. I stood there, frozen in the spotlight of their wealthy, cruel amusement. I was holding a dripping toilet brush. They were sipping ice water from crystal glasses. They were making a spectator sport out of my poverty. My father slowly raised his wine glass toward me in a mock toast. Maybe now, he mouthed, his eyes completely dead, you'll learn your place. I didn't cry. My heart was pounding so hard it physically hurt my ribs, but my eyes stayed completely dry. I stared down at the man who had destroyed my life, and in that agonizing silent moment, something soft inside me permanently turned to stone. I remembered the words my grandmother had whispered to me on her porch years ago. Someday you'll need help. They won't give you. I've already prepared for your future. Legally. Quietly. When the time comes, you'll know. I gripped the handle of my cart. I turned my back on my laughing family, and I walked away into the shadows of the hallway. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but the time was coming. 4 weeks after the restaurant incident, the silence in my apartment was deafening. The rusted radiator in the corner clanked a rhythmic, hollow sound that only emphasized how empty my life had become. I sat on the scratched hardwood floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, rubbing the chemical burns on my wrists. My rent was due in exactly 5 days. I was $200 short. I began digging through a box of old college belongings, desperately looking for anything to pawn. Specialized financial calculators I couldn't bear to part with, a broken desk lamp, and at the bottom, tangled in a frayed charging cord, my old phone. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks. I hadn't used it in over 2 years. I stared at it, rubbing the heavy layer of dust coating its surface. For reasons I still can't fully explain, instinct, desperation, or maybe just the ghost of my grandmother guiding my hand, I plugged it into the wall outlet. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. I was about to unplug it when the cracked screen suddenly flickered to life. A faint, bruised purple light illuminated the dark room. Notifications flooded the locked screen. Hundreds of spam emails, old college group texts, and one single unheard voicemail from 3 years ago, the exact week after Grandma Eleanor's funeral. My thumb hovered over the play button. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. I pressed it. Miss Sterling, a voice crackled through the damaged speaker. It was a man's voice, measured, professional, carrying the unmistakable weight of expensive billable hours. This is Arthur Pendleton from Pendleton and Graves Law Firm. I am the appointed trustee for the EV Legacy Trust. I am calling regarding a highly confidential matter pertaining to the estate of Eleanor Vance. The room seemed to tilt. The radiator hissed. EV Legacy Trust. My father had told us Grandma left everything to charity, save for a meager $5,000 payout to each grandchild. He had looked me directly in the eye, sighed, and called her overly sentimental with her money. There are time-sensitive legal documents that require your direct signature, the voice continued, smooth and urgent. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Click. I sat completely frozen on the floor. 3 years. I had missed this call 3 years ago, drowning in the suffocating fog of grief and my father's psychological warfare. I scrambled for my current phone, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice. I dialed the number for Pendleton and Graves. The ringing felt endlessly slow, stretching the tension until I thought my nerves would snap. Pendleton and Graves. How may I direct your call? Arthur Pendleton, please, I said, my voice tight and breathless. I'm calling about the Eleanor Vance estate, specifically the EV Legacy Trust. Keys clacked on the other end. I apologize, Mr. Pendleton retired last month due to health issues. His specialized trust cases were transferred to our senior partners. Let me check the file. More typing. The silence on the line stretched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel the invisible machinery of my father's control shifting in the dark. Ma'am, I see a restricted note here, the receptionist said, her tone suddenly cautious, pulling back. Mr. Pendleton attempted to reach you multiple times. The file indicates that eventually your father, Richard Sterling, contacted our office directly. Ice flooded my veins. My father? What exactly did he say? I shouldn't. Well, I am just reading the paralegal's notes. It says, Family Representative Richard Sterling confirmed beneficiary. Chloe Sterling is medically unfit and has declined further contact regarding the trust. I stopped breathing. The walls of my tiny apartment seemed to press inward, crushing the air out of my lungs. He intercepted my mail. He intercepted my inheritance. He had officially, legally lied to a massive law firm, branding me mentally incompetent to prevent me from accessing whatever Grandma had left me. Can you tell me who handles the trust now? I demanded, gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. Because it is a sealed blind trust, I would need to verify your identity in person to share any details. I can leave a note for the partner. I hung up. My analytical mind, the one that had earned a 3.8 GPA, kicked into overdrive. A blind trust. That meant whatever was inside was legally walled off. My father didn't just want me to stay away from it, he legally couldn't access it himself. If he could have, the assets would already be in his offshore corporate accounts. He didn't just want me broke, he was actively keeping me from a life raft he couldn't sink. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Caller ID, Dad. I stared at the screen, the glowing letters burning into my retinas. He hadn't called me in months. Not since the horrific humiliation at the hotel restaurant. I pressed answer, holding the phone to my ear without making a sound. Chloe. His voice was warm, sickeningly, terrifyingly sweet, the velvet glove sliding perfectly over the iron fist. How are you? I'm fine, Dad, I replied, keeping my tone completely dead. Listen, I've been thinking, he murmured. I could hear the faint clink of ice against crystal in the background. This little rebellion has gone on long enough. You've learned your lesson. Your mother misses you. I miss you. Come home. I stared at the dark water stain on my ceiling. Come home and do what? Work at the company. I'll pay you an entry-level stipend. Not much, but something. You'll live with us. Get back on your feet and out of those filthy hotel rooms. It sounded so perfectly reasonable. If I hadn't known about the trust, if I hadn't heard the lawyer's voicemail, I might have broken down and cried with relief. And the corporate blacklist? I asked softly, testing the perimeter of his trap. The lies you told every bank in the county. Water under the bridge. He dismissed it casually, as if he were waving away a fly, rather than the wreckage of my life. Come home, apologize to the family, and I'll make a few calls. Clear your name. You know I have the power to fix this instantly. I closed my eyes. And if I don't? The warmth vanished in a millisecond. The plug was pulled, leaving only a dark, venomous undercurrent. Then you can keep scrubbing trucker toilets until you starve, he hissed, his voice dropping into a low, vibrating growl. I can make sure your landlord kicks you out next week. I know he's up for a commercial loan renewal at the local branch. I can make one phone call, Chloe. Your choice. He hung up. The line went dead. He was escalating. The trap was tightening. But why now? Why the sudden aggressive urgency to bring me back into his physical control? I didn't have the answer yet, but the panic in my chest told me everything I needed to know. I had to run. I had to get out of his jurisdiction, far away from the county he owned. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys in the dark, searching for financial firms in cities hundreds of miles away, places where the name Richard Sterling meant absolutely nothing. The heavy plastic jug of industrial bleach slipped from my raw fingers, hitting the supply closet floor with a dull thud. I froze, terrified the noise would draw the manager, but the sound was swallowed by the hum of the hotel's air conditioning. I was working the midnight shift at the Maplewood Lodge. My back ached, and my hands burned from the cleaning chemicals. I knelt to pick up the jug, and that's when I heard it. The sound drifted up through the metal ventilation grate near the baseboards. The duct connected directly to the private dining room on the first floor. It was a voice a deep, confident, terrifyingly familiar voice. My father. I crept closer, the harsh smell of bleach burning my nose. I pressed my ear against the freezing metal grate, holding my breath. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears I was afraid the men below could hear it. I tell you, Thomas, the timing is absolutely flawless, my father was saying. His tone was jovial, the sound of a man who had already won the game. I don't know, Richard, a second voice replied. Older, gruff, hesitant. Thomas Jenkins, owner of Jenkins HVAC, the largest heating and cooling contractor in the state. Your daughter. My wife hears things at the country club. The theft issue. The instability. My son is taking over the business soon. He needs a stable, respectable wife, not a liability. The air in the closet grew thick and suffocating. A wife. My father laughed. It wasn't a warm sound, it was the sharp metallic sound of a trap snapping shut. Thomas, please. That rumor is completely handled. It was just a disciplinary tactic. I had to break her spirit a little. You ruined her reputation to teach her a lesson, Jenkins asked, sounding slightly disturbed. I secured my investment, my father corrected him smoothly, his voice echoing up the metal shaft. She thought she could leave the family. She's currently scrubbing trucker toilets for minimum wage. I'm pulling the strings on her apartment lease next week. Another month of that misery, another month of starving, and she'll agree to absolutely anything, including meeting your boy. I squeezed my eyes shut. Hot, angry tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, tracking through the chemical dust on my cheeks. She will be the perfect, quiet, obedient wife, my father continued. We merge the families, we merge the businesses, Sterling Development and Jenkins HVAC. We will completely dominate the state's commercial real estate market. Jenkins let out a low whistle. Richard, you are a ruthless piece of work. A forced marriage to seal a corporate merger. I prefer the term strategic alliance, my father replied coldly. She'll do exactly what she's told, because I have made sure she has no other options left in this world. Now let's talk equity numbers. I pushed myself away from the vent. I slid down the rough wall until I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by rolls of toilet paper and scrub brushes. I pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms. My whole body shook uncontrollably. He didn't just want to control me, he wanted to sell me. That was why he had called. That was why he had threatened my landlord. He needed me homeless and completely broken right now, so he could trade me to a business rival like a piece of heavy machinery. If I stayed in this town, I would become property. I finished my shift in a total daze. When I got back to my apartment at 6 a.m., I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking with a new, terrifying kind of adrenaline. I couldn't fight him locally. I had to escape the state entirely. For the next 2 weeks, I applied to massive financial conglomerates in major cities I had never even visited. Seattle, Austin, Boston, places where a local construction bully had zero leverage. The rejections piled up instantly. Automated HR systems immediately flagged the 3-year gap in my professional resume. When I managed to get a phone screening, I tried telling the truth. My father blockaded my local employment due to a family dispute. That sounds like a highly complicated personal situation, one recruiter said softly. It was polite corporate code for we don't want your drama. Click. My bank account dropped to $140. I was eating plain rice for dinner. My landlord had slipped an eviction warning under my door, just as my father promised. The walls were finally crushing me. I sat on my mattress one rainy Tuesday evening, staring at my dark laptop screen, entirely out of hope. Then, my phone chimed, a single email notification. I opened it slowly, expecting another form rejection. Subject, interview invitation. Caldwell Enterprises, final round screening. I stopped breathing. I read the screen 3 times, my eyes tracing the glowing letters in the dark. Dear Miss Sterling, we have reviewed your application. Your academic record is exceptional. We would like to invite you for an intensive in-person technical screening at our headquarters. Should you pass the morning assessments, please note that the final interview will be conducted by our CEO, Mr. Harrison Caldwell, personally. This is highly unusual, but your file was flagged at the executive level. Please confirm your availability. I dropped the phone on the bed. Caldwell Enterprises was a multi-billion-dollar financial powerhouse, dominating 3 states. They were leagues above my entry-level experience, and the CEO wanted to meet me if I passed the tests. It made absolutely no sense. For a panicked second, I wondered if Julian had set up a cruel fake email to mock me. But then Grandma Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, as clear as if she were sitting next to me in the dark. When the time comes, you'll know. My hands trembled as I picked the phone back up. I didn't have money for a flight. I barely had money for a bus ticket, but this was the door she had promised. I typed my reply, "I am available at your earliest convenience." I had exactly $53 to my name. It wasn't enough for a bus ticket to the city, let alone a motel room for the night before the interview. I went to my manager at the hotel, Brenda. I stood in the doorway of her small windowless office, twisting the hem of my bleach-stained uniform. I didn't have to explain much. She looked at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes, and she understood. "I need 3 days off," I told her quietly. Brenda didn't ask questions. She didn't check the schedule. She simply reached into her own worn leather purse, pulled out a crumpled $50 bill, and pressed it into my cracked, dry hand. "Go get your life back," she said, her voice rough. She wrapped her fingers tightly around mine for a second. "You don't belong here, Chloe. You never did," I cried in the break room locker area. It was the first time in 3 years someone had offered me help without a hidden trap attached. 3 days later, I was sitting on a Greyhound bus, watching the dark, rain-streaked landscape blur past the window. I wore a second-hand navy suit I had found at Goodwill. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, but it was clean. Every mile that put distance between me and my father's town felt like peeling off a heavy, suffocating blanket. But the fear remained. It was a cold knot in my stomach, whispering that this was all a mistake. The bus dropped me off in the city center at midnight. I found a budget motel 3 blocks from the Caldwell Enterprises headquarters. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon cleaner. The yellow wallpaper was peeling at the corners, and the neon sign outside buzzed angrily, casting a harsh red light across my thin blanket. I hung my Goodwill suit in the tiny bathroom, turning the shower on pure hot to let the steam work out the wrinkles. Then I sat cross-legged on the lumpy mattress. I stayed awake until 3 a.m. I didn't sleep a single wink. Instead, I fiercely reviewed advanced financial modeling, corporate tax codes, and compliance regulations. I treated the motel desk like a war room. I was auditing my own brain, ensuring every formula and every market trend was razor-sharp. My eyes burned and my head pounded from exhaustion, but I refused to close my books. I was not going to fail this technical test. At 7 a.m. I put on my suit. I polished my only pair of black heels with a tissue. I looked in the cracked mirror. I looked thin, tired, and fragile. But behind my eyes, there was a quiet, desperate fire. The morning air was crisp and freezing as I walked toward the financial district. And then I saw it, the Caldwell Enterprises building. It was a gleaming 32-story tower of mirrored glass and dark steel that pierced the sky. It screamed institutional power. I felt incredibly small standing on the sidewalk, a mouse approaching a fortress. I was 60 feet from the revolving glass doors when my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed on the screen. "Dad." My thumb hovered over the red ignore button. My lungs seized up. How could he possibly know? I was 400 miles away. I was off his chessboard. But a sickening curiosity, a need to know where the threat was coming from, made me press answer. I lifted the phone to my ear, my hand shaking violently. "Chloe," my father said. His voice was flat, lethally cold. "I hear you have an interview today." The bustling city noise around me seemed to fade into a vacuum. The pavement felt like it was shifting under my cheap heels. "How do you know that?" I breathed. "You got careless," he said smoothly. The sound of his leather office chair squeaking echoed through the speaker. "You threw away your practice notes and printed Caldwell prospectuses in the lobby trash at the lodge. Julian paid a busboy $50 to keep an eye on your garbage." My son pieced it together quite easily. I felt physically sick. Bile rose in my throat. My sheer exhaustion had betrayed me. They had been hunting me, watching my trash like scavengers. "It doesn't matter, Dad," I said, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. "This is none of your business. You don't own this city." "I know people in finance at the state level, Chloe," he replied, his tone dropping to a dark, vibrating warning. "The industry is much smaller than you think. One phone call to their HR department. That's all it takes. I will explain that you are a severe liability, a thief who stole from her own family, a young woman under severe psychological distress who cannot be trusted with corporate data." "You wouldn't," I whispered, tears of sheer panic pricking my eyes. "You have no leverage over Caldwell Enterprises. They are a multi-billion-dollar firm. You're just a local contractor." "Try me," he sneered. "I will poison this well just like I poisoned the others. Or better yet, you can turn around right now. Get on the next bus home. Accept the Jenkins proposal. This is your absolute last chance, Chloe. Come home or I end you." My phone buzzed against my cheek. I pulled it back to look. It was a text from Julian. "You're done, sis. Dad already called their corporate switchboard. Enjoy the bus ride home." My vision blurred. The towering glass building in front of me suddenly looked like an illusion, a mirage that was already dissolving. He had already called. He had poisoned the water before I even took a sip. I imagined walking into that pristine lobby only to have security guards publicly escort me out because I was flagged as a deranged thief. I stood frozen on the concrete, people in expensive suits rushing past me. I could surrender. I could get back on the bus, go home and let him trade me to the Jenkins family. But I thought of the heavy bleach jugs. I thought of the humiliating laughter in the restaurant. I thought of Grandma Eleanor. I took a deep, shaking breath. I silenced my phone and dropped it to the bottom of my purse. I squared my shoulders, smoothed down my Goodwill jacket, and walked straight through the revolving glass doors. The lobby of Caldwell Enterprises was a cathedral of wealth. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the 4-story glass atrium above. Executives in sharp, custom-tailored suits glided past me, their voices low and urgent. Every surface, from the brushed steel elevators to the massive abstract paintings, was designed to make you feel small. I felt microscopic. My cheap second-hand heels clicked awkwardly against the marble. I approached the glowing curved reception desk. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. My father's voice echoed in my head. I already called their corporate switchboard. Enjoy the bus ride home. I kept expecting a heavy hand to drop onto my shoulder, a security guard to grab my arm and publicly drag the deranged thief out onto the pavement. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked. Her smile was professional, but her eyes quickly scanned my wrinkled Goodwill jacket. "Chloe Sterling," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm here for the financial analyst technical screening." She typed my name into her computer. Click, click, click. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I held my breath. I braced myself for the frown, the confused look, the inevitable phone call to security. I closed my eyes, preparing for the crushing weight of my father's victory. "Yes, Miss Sterling," the receptionist said brightly. My eyes snapped open. "You are expected," she continued, handing me a temporary badge. 10th floor HR Assessment Center. "The elevators are just behind you to the right." He didn't get to them, or if he did, they didn't care. A massive wave of relief washed over me, so powerful my knees nearly buckled. I took the badge with shaking hands. "Thank you." The 10th floor was a stark contrast to the lobby. It was quiet, sterile, and buzzing with nervous energy. I was placed in a glass-walled conference room alongside 8 other candidates. They all looked like they had stepped out of high-end business magazines, whispering confidently about their Ivy League master's degrees. I sat in the corner, keeping my raw, chemically burned hands hidden in my lap. A proctor walked in and handed out thick packets and assigned us to secure laptops. "You have 4 hours, the proctor announced, his voice flat. "Begin." For the next 4 hours, I was plunged into the most grueling financial gauntlet of my life. The tests were intentionally brutal. We had to build complex discounted cash flow models from scratch. We were handed intentionally flawed balance sheets and told to find the microscopic errors hiding in the margins. We had to write a massive macroeconomic risk assessment based on shifting global interest rates. Around me, I heard the heavy sighs of the other candidates. I heard nervous shifting, the frantic clicking of keyboards, and muttered curses. But I didn't panic. As I stared at the numbers, the noise of the room faded away. The memory of my father's cruel laughter vanished. The smell of the hotel bleach disappeared. For 3 years, my father had controlled my life by manipulating people, spreading rumors and leveraging his power. But he couldn't manipulate math. Numbers were pure. Numbers didn't care what town you were from, or what lies your family told about you. I poured every ounce of my 3.8 GPA into that keyboard. I poured every late night in the college library, every tear I'd shed scrubbing hotel grout, and every ounce of my silent burning rage into those spreadsheets. My fingers flew across the keys. My mind, trained by Grandma Eleanor when I was just a teenager, sliced through the complex tax codes like a scalpel. At exactly noon, the proctor called time. I sat back, my chest heaving as if I had just run a marathon. My hands were cramping, but my mind felt incredibly clear. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. The candidates were told to wait in a lounge area while the automated systems and senior analysts graded the submissions. We sat in agonizing silence for 45 minutes. Finally, the heavy wooden door opened. The vice president of human resources walked in. She was a tall, severe-looking woman holding a digital tablet. She didn't address the group. Her eyes scanned the room until they locked onto me. She looked deeply shocked. "Miss Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet room. "Please come with me." The other candidates stared at me as I stood up, my heart resuming its frantic hammering. Did they find the gap in my resume? Did my father's phone call finally catch up to me? I followed her into a small private glass office. She shut the door, ensuring no one could hear us. She looked down at her tablet, then back up at me. "Miss Sterling," she began slowly, tracing a finger over the screen. "You completed the entire battery of tests. You built a flawless risk assessment matrix." "Yes, ma'am," I whispered. "You scored a 99.4%, she said, her voice shifting from corporate stiffness to genuine profound respect. "That is the highest technical score this company has seen in 3 years." I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 19 years old. Tears of pure absolute relief pricked the corners of my eyes. Thank you so much. As per the specific executive flag on your file," she continued, setting the tablet down, "you have passed the required threshold. The standard interview process ends here for you." "I don't understand," I said, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "Mr. Caldwell will see you personally now," she said, gesturing toward the private brushed steel elevator at the end of the hall. 32nd floor. "He has been waiting for you." The private elevator had no buttons. It was a smooth brushed steel box that carried me upward in absolute terrifying silence. My ears popped as the floors flicked by on the digital display. 25, 30 said. With every floor I was putting physical distance between myself and the dirt, the harsh bleach, and the suffocating grip of my father's world. The doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped into a massive corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling gray city below, making the cars look like tiny insects. Standing by the glass, gazing out at the skyline, was Harrison Caldwell. He was in his late 40s, silver touching his temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I had earned in 3 years of scrubbing floors. He turned around. I braced myself. I expected the sharp, calculating stare of a billionaire CEO. I expected him to ask about my 3-year employment gap, or worse, to confront me about the horrible lies my father had undoubtedly told his HR department that morning. Instead, Harrison Caldwell's shoulders dropped. He let out a long, slow exhale. He didn't look at me like a job candidate. He looked at me with profound, unmistakable relief. "Miss Sterling," he said softly, "please, sit down." I carefully sat on the edge of a deep leather chair, my Goodwill suit feeling stiff and absurd in this room. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm deeply honored, but I'm not entirely sure why I am." He held up a hand, a gentle but firm gesture that stopped my nervous rambling. "Before we discuss the analyst position you just earned," Harrison said, walking toward the far wall, "I need to fulfill a legal and moral obligation." He pushed aside a framed painting, revealing a heavy vintage brass safe built directly into the oak paneling. The room was completely silent except for the heavy clack 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 of the metal dial turning under his precise fingers. The heavy door swung open. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, slightly yellowed envelope. He walked back to the desk and set it down between us. It was sealed with dark amber wax. My eyes dropped to the handwriting on the front. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I physically gasped. The letters were elegant, looping, and entirely familiar, only to be opened when Eleanor Vance has passed away and her granddaughter Chloe Sterling comes for an interview at Caldwell Enterprises. It was dated 12 years ago, the exact day we had sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Your grandmother," Harrison said, his voice thick with a quiet, fierce respect, "was the first person in this world who ever believed in me." I couldn't tear my eyes away from the envelope. "You knew her?" Harrison sat across from me, folding his hands on the desk. 18 years ago, I was a desperate kid with a brilliant financial technology business plan, but absolutely zero capital. Every major bank in your county rejected me. They laughed me out of their lobbies. He paused, a muscle feathering in his jaw. Eleanor Vance didn't laugh. She sat down, reviewed my complex prospectuses, saw the math, and wrote me a seed funding check for $250,000 from her private accounts. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "She made me promise one thing," Harrison continued softly. "She looked me dead in the eye and said, 'Someday a young woman named Chloe Sterling is going to need a safe harbor. She will eventually apply to your company. When she does, give her this.' I had my IT department flag your social security number in our applicant tracking system 12 years ago. The exact second you submitted your application from that motel last month, my personal phone rang. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grab my own wrists to steady them. I reached out and touched the brittle amber wax. 'Open it,' he whispered. I broke the seal. It snapped with a dry crack that echoed in the quiet office. Inside were 3 items: a small leather journal, a handwritten letter on heavy stationery, and a thick, notarized legal certificate bearing the Caldwell Enterprises corporate logo, dated 18 years ago. I opened the leather journal first. The pages were filled with my grandmother's meticulous handwriting. November 2001. Richard screamed at Evelyn about the grocery bill today. He enjoys making her cower. I see it. April 2005. Richard refused to pay for Chloe's advanced math camp, calling it a waste of resources on a daughter. He is trying to clip her wings early. Page after page. Dates, times, exact quotes. It was a ledger of my father's psychological abuse. For years my mother had told me I was overreacting, that my father just had a temper, that I needed to be more forgiving. But here was the truth, documented in ink. Validation. I wasn't crazy. Grandma had seen the monster hiding behind the expensive suits all along. Your grandmother knew exactly what kind of tyrant your father was, Harrison said quietly, watching the tears well up in my eyes. She knew he would try to trap you, so she built you a fortress he couldn't breach. I set the journal down and picked up the notarized certificate. I read the heavy black text. Certificate of Stock Ownership. The EV Legacy Trust. Beneficiary, Chloe Sterling. 12% founding stake, Caldwell Enterprises LLC. I stared at the paper. The numbers didn't make sense to my exhausted brain. I don't understand, I stammered. 12%? When she invested, Harrison explained, his tone shifting into a sharp, precise gear. She demanded the equity be placed in an impenetrable blind trust with Arthur Pendleton as the executor. She legally barred your father, Richard Sterling, from ever having knowledge of it, or access to it. The trust was designed to unlock and transfer directly to your name only upon her death and your physical arrival at this building. She knew your father would try to intercept the lawyers. She knew he would lie, so she made me the ultimate failsafe. I finally opened Grandma's letter. My dearest Chloe, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have finally found your way to the door I built for you. I saw the signs early. The control, the cruelty disguised as discipline. I knew Richard would eventually try to break your spirit and trap you in his house. I put this equity in your name because I wanted you to have leverage. Use it. Build a life that belongs to you. You do not owe obedience to a family that treats love like a leash. Live free, Chloe. All my love, Grandma. A single tear spilled over my lashes, dropping onto the old paper. Years of deep, suffocating humiliation, of scrubbing mildew from truck stop showers, of believing I was a worthless burden, of hiding in supply closets while my family laughed at me, washed away in a sudden overwhelming flood. I pressed the letter to my face and wept. I sobbed until my chest ached, the sound echoing in the massive executive office. Harrison didn't say a word. He just sat there, guarding the door, letting me finally break apart so I could put myself back together. When my breathing finally slowed and I wiped my face with the back of my raw hand, Harrison cleared his throat. The warmth in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by a cold, terrifying corporate sharpness. I have to tell you something else, Chloe, he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. Your father did exactly what you feared. He called our corporate HR switchboard this morning. The cold returned, creeping up my spine. What did he say? He demanded to speak to a senior executive. He claimed you were medically unstable. He said you were a known thief who embezzled from his company, and he threatened to leverage his local political contacts to block our firm's expansion in your county if we dared to hire you. Harrison's eyes flashed with a dark, protective anger. He was incredibly arrogant. He spoke to me as if I were one of his terrified local bank managers. And what did you do? I whispered, terrified that Richard's poison had somehow still infected this room. Harrison smiled. It was the smile of a great white shark. I listened, Harrison said smoothly, and then I looked down at the legal documents on my desk. Documents proving that the young woman he was slandering actually owns 12% of my multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. He leaned forward, tapping his finger on the desk. Chloe, your grandmother's $250,000 seed investment grew exponentially as we expanded across 3 states. Your 12% stake is currently valued at approximately $145 million. The number hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The breath was knocked entirely out of my lungs. $145 million. Yes, Harrison said, his smile widening into something almost viciously satisfied. Your father just attempted to blackmail and slander a founding shareholder of my company. He tried to threaten a woman who technically holds enough voting power to fire me. Harrison leaned back, adjusting his cuffs. I don't think Richard Sterling is accustomed to making that kind of severe miscalculation. For the first time in 3 long, agonizing years, A sound bubbled up in my chest. It started as a gasp, and then it turned into a laugh. I sat in my cheap Goodwill suit, holding a piece of paper worth a fortune, and I laughed until my ribs ached. It was a sound of pure unadulterated freedom. The chains were gone. Harrison waited for my laughter to subside before he spoke again, his voice deadly serious. Next month, Caldwell Enterprises hosts its annual charity gala at the St. Regis Plaza. It is our biggest networking event of the year. Your father, ironically, RSVP'd weeks ago. He has been desperately aggressively trying to secure our new commercial construction contracts. I have been ignoring his calls. Harrison watched my face carefully, evaluating the new iron that had just formed in my spine. I would like to introduce you at that gala, he said, as our brilliant new senior financial analyst, a job you earned today strictly on your own merit, and as a major founding shareholder. Your father will be sitting in the front row. I thought about the night at the hotel. I thought about Julian laughing as I held a toilet brush. I thought of my mother looking away. I don't want revenge, I said slowly, the words tasting heavy and final. I don't want to scream at him on a microphone. That makes me exactly like him. Harrison nodded respectfully. This isn't revenge, Chloe. It's exposure. Turn the lights on. Let people see who you really are, and let your father's house of cards collapse under the weight of his own monstrous arrogance. I looked down at Grandma's letter. Live free. I looked up at Harrison, and for the first time in my life I felt truly dangerous. Yes, I said smoothly. Let's do it. 1 month later, I stood in the shadows of the VIP balcony overlooking the St. Regis Plaza ballroom. The air smelled of roasted lamb, expensive floral arrangements, and heavy imported perfumes. Below me, 250 of the state's wealthiest politicians, bankers and investors mingled under massive crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music floating up to the ceiling. I looked down at myself. I was wearing a stunning dark navy Oscar de la Renta sheath dress, provided by the firm's executive stylist. The silk felt like cool water against my skin. There were no chemical burns on my hands anymore. The cuts had healed. But as I watched the crowd below, my heart still beat with the frantic, nervous rhythm of a hunted animal. The phantom smell of industrial bleach lingered somewhere in the back of my memory. They just arrived, a voice whispered behind me. It was Harrison's executive assistant. I stepped closer to the glass barrier, my hands gripping the cool metal railing. My family entered the ballroom. My father Richard walked in first. He wore a custom charcoal Armani suit, his chest puffed out, owning the room exactly as he did back in our small town. But from up here, looking down at him surrounded by real billionaires and corporate titans, he suddenly looked very small. He was a local bully who had just wandered into an ocean of sharks. My mother Evelyn trailed a few steps behind him like a silent, obedient shadow. She wore her pearls and a forced, frozen smile. Julian walked beside them, holding a glass of champagne, looking deeply bored but intensely arrogant. I watched my father immediately go to work. He began aggressively moving through the crowd, shaking hands, clapping men on the shoulder. He was desperate. I knew from my new position as senior financial analyst that Sterling Development was losing money. He needed the massive Caldwell Enterprises construction contracts to survive the year. Through the glass, I watched my father corner Sarah, the chief operations officer of Caldwell Enterprises. I couldn't hear his exact words over the music, but I didn't need to. I knew the choreography by heart. I watched my father lean in close. I saw him tilt his head, adopting a mask of deep, fatherly sorrow. He put a hand over his heart. He was telling her the story. My daughter, the thief. Such a tragedy. We tried to help her, but she's unstable. He was trying to build a false bond of sympathy to secure a business deal. I watched Sarah's face, farch because she already knew the truth. A micro-expression of pure disgust flashed across her eyes. She gave him a tight, entirely fake corporate smile, nodded once, and quickly walked away. My father smiled proudly, completely misreading her reaction, thinking he had won her over. A cold, precise calm settled over me. As an accountant, I spent my life balancing ledgers. For 3 years my father had kept my life in the red, stealing my joy, my career, and my dignity. Tonight, the accounts would finally be settled. Mr. Caldwell is stepping up to the podium, the assistant whispered, touching my elbow. It's time, Chloe. I nodded. I reached into my small clutch purse and touched the folded edge of Grandma Eleanor's letter. Live free. I walked toward the grand staircase that led down to the stage. With every step, a heavy piece of my past fell away. Step, the $1,500 I spent on textbooks. Step, the 25 job rejections. Step, the yellow rubber gloves and the trucker motel. By the time I reached the heavy velvet curtains beside the stage, my fear was completely gone. Only pure, focused clarity remained. "Good evening," Harrison Caldwell's voice boomed through the massive speakers, silencing the ballroom. The string quartet stopped playing. 250 faces turned toward the stage. I peeked through the curtain. My family was seated at table 4, right in the front row. Julian was checking his phone. My father was leaning forward, practically vibrating with eagerness, hoping Harrison would announce the new construction contracts. "Before we discuss our philanthropic goals for the upcoming year," Harrison said smoothly, resting his hands on the podium, "I have a profound personal honor. Tonight, we officially welcome a brilliant new senior financial analyst to our corporate headquarters." My father clapped politely, looking around the room to see if anyone was watching him be a good guest. But more importantly, Harrison's voice deepened, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We welcome a woman whose family provided the original seed capital that built Caldwell Enterprises 18 years ago. She is a major founding shareholder. She is the living embodiment of our core values, and her intelligence is unmatched. Please welcome Miss Chloe Sterling." The spotlight swung away from the podium and blasted the side stage door with blinding white light. I stepped out from behind the velvet curtain. The applause started, polite and scattered. But then, it happened. The shock wave hit table 4. Julian's mouth fell open. The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped through his fingers and hit the marble floor with a sharp, violent crash, shattering into 100 pieces. My mother gasped, both of her hands flying to her mouth. She gripped the edge of the white tablecloth so hard the silverware rattled. But my father, Richard Sterling, froze completely. From 10 feet away, I watched his brain fail to process reality. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening, chalky white. He stared at me in the Oscar de la Renta dress, standing in the spotlight, and his eyes bulged. Then, the shock evaporated, rapidly replaced by a terrifying, mottled purple rage. The veins in his neck popped against his expensive silk tie. His reality, his absolute control over his universe, was dissolving right in front of his eyes. I stood calmly at the microphone. I didn't smile, I just looked directly down at him. Before Harrison could step back to join me, my father's mind snapped. He couldn't handle the public subversion of his power. He pushed his chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed to the floor. He stormed right up to the very edge of the stage, pushing violently past the city's mayor and 2 state senators. "This is a fraud," my father bellowed. His voice was a raw, booming roar that shattered the elegant silence of the ballroom. "Security, remove her immediately. She is a liar and a thief." A collective horrified gasp rippled through the elite crowd. The room instantly turned ice cold. The trap was sprung. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the microphone stand in front of me. 250 people stared at my father in absolute horror. Richard Sterling stood at the edge of the stage, breathing heavily. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his perfectly combed hair. His expensive Armani suit suddenly looked like a costume he had outgrown. His right eye twitched, a tiny uncontrolled spasm of pure panic. Harrison stepped smoothly back to the microphone. His voice was dangerously calm, dropping the temperature in the room by another 10 degrees. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said. The speakers amplified his cool, even tone. "You are disrupting a private corporate event. I strongly suggest you lower your voice. You don't understand." Richard pointed a trembling, furious finger at me. He was completely unhinged now. His ego simply could not process being told no in a room full of powerful people. He grabbed the edge of the stage, leaning forward. "She stole $1,500 from her own family. She scrubs toilets at a truck stop. I made sure she couldn't get a job anywhere in my county because she refuses to obey me. She is completely unstable." The words echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He had done it, in his blind, arrogant rage, assuming he could bully a billionaire CEO exactly like he bullied local bank managers. Richard had just confessed. He had admitted to corporate extortion, blackmail, and psychological abuse on a live microphone in front of every major politician, banker, and investor in the state. I looked down at him. I didn't feel fear anymore. I just felt a deep, hollow pity. He wasn't a giant. He was just a sad, cruel man, terrified of losing his grip. Harrison didn't flinch. He adjusted his cuffs, staring down at my father like a scientist studying a bug. "I am well aware of your extortion tactics, Mr. Sterling," Harrison replied, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I am aware that you blackmailed local businesses to starve your daughter into submission, and I am perfectly aware that the so-called theft was $1,500 in college textbooks that she paid back with meticulously kept receipts. Richard sputtered. He wiped a shaking hand across his sweating mouth. She owns nothing. My mother-in-law was senile. I am the head of the family. I demand control of those shares. Miss Sterling is 28 years old, Harrison said cleanly, driving the final nail into the coffin. The EV Legacy Trust was executed via a legally airtight blind trust that explicitly excluded you. She owns 12% of this firm. You, Mr. Sterling, own a local construction company that as of this morning has been permanently blacklisted from ever bidding on a Caldwell Enterprises project. A second gasp rippled through the crowd. My mother rushed forward from table 4. She grabbed Richard's arm, sobbing in complete humiliation. Richard, stop, please. Everyone is watching us. You're ruining everything. He shoved her away violently. Evelyn stumbled backward, catching herself on a chair. Richard looked up at me, pure venom in his dark eyes. You ungrateful little wretch, he snarled, his voice cracking. I destroyed your career to teach you respect. I'd do it again. You are my daughter. You are my property. Julian finally stepped forward. He didn't look at me. He grabbed his father's shoulders, his face pale with terror. Dad, shut up. Shut up right now. You're destroying the company. Julian wasn't defending me. The golden boy had just realized his father was burning their empire to the ground, and taking Julian's inheritance with it. I leaned into the microphone. I didn't yell. I didn't hurl insults. I spoke with an absolute terrifying calm that I had learned from surviving the dark. For 3 years, I said, my voice steady and clear, I was blacklisted from my own profession. I cleaned hotel rooms until my hands bled to survive, because I refused to be traded like cattle in a corporate merger you were planning with Jenkins HVAC. A loud murmur of shock went through the crowd. Corporate arranged marriages belonged in the Middle Ages. Several investors at the front tables turned away from my father in open disgust. My grandmother saw exactly what kind of man you were, Richard. I continued, looking down at the man who had tormented me. She couldn't save my mother, but she legally planned ahead to save me. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything for you at all. But you have zero power over me anymore. I am Chloe Sterling, financial analyst, shareholder, and an independent woman. Do not ever contact me again. I stepped back from the podium. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a standing ovation, led by Sarah, the chief operations officer. 250 people stood up, clapping, staring at Richard Sterling with total contempt. Harrison nodded toward the back of the room. 2 uniformed police officers, who had been working off-duty security for the event, stepped forward. They walked down the center aisle, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. Sir, the taller officer said, grabbing my father's arm. You need to step outside right now. Get your hands off me. I know the mayor, Richard screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip. But his strength was gone. He looked wild, desperate and pathetic. The officers dragged him backward down the aisle. My mother followed, weeping silently into her hands. Julian trailed behind them, his head hung low in total defeat. An hour later, I sat in a quiet side office off the main lobby. The adrenaline had faded, leaving me completely numb. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the marble walls through the window. A detective sat across from me with a notepad. Because Richard had confessed to financial blackmail and corporate interference on a hot microphone in front of state senators, the police had to take a report. I answered the detective's questions with total emotional detachment. Yes, he threatened my landlord. Yes, he admitted to blocking my employment. No, I did not want to press domestic charges, but I would provide my emails and rejection letters for their corporate extortion file. I watched through the glass doors as they put my father into the back of a police cruiser for a formal interview. I felt no joy. I just felt tired. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, the HR director from Bennett Financial Group, the woman who had warned me in the locked interview room years ago, approached me. She had tears in her eyes. Miss Sterling, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I am so profoundly sorry. We were terrified of his leverage. If we had known you had Caldwell backing. It's okay, I told her honestly, offering a gentle smile. I built my own door. 2 months later, my life was entirely unrecognizable. I sat at my heavy glass desk in a corner office on the 18th floor. Rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I successfully managed complex, multi-million-dollar portfolios. My $145 million equity remained safely invested, growing quietly, providing me with dividends that had allowed me to buy a beautiful, quiet penthouse overlooking the water. The fallout for Sterling Development was catastrophic. After Richard's public meltdown and his recorded confession of extortion, 3 major banks pulled their funding entirely, citing moral clauses and severe liability risks. His company didn't go bankrupt, but it was ruined. It was reduced to bidding on minor, cheap residential projects. My mother called me once. She left a voicemail, crying, begging me to come back and fix the family because my father wouldn't get out of bed. I texted her back. "I forgive you, Mom, but I will never step foot in that house again." Julian texted me a generic, PR-style apology, clearly hoping I would send him money. I blocked his number without replying. Every Saturday morning, I drive out to the quiet green hills of the local cemetery. I lay yellow roses on Grandma Eleanor's grave. I sit in the cool breeze, listening to the birds, feeling the absolute stillness of a life that finally belongs to me. I touch the cold stone, remembering the words she left in that envelope. "Live free, Chloe." And finally, looking out at the endless open sky, I am. If you are stuck in a dark place, chained by people who use money, manipulation, or reputation to keep you small, please know this: boundaries are not betrayal. Survival is not a sin. Build your own door in silence. And when the time comes, walk through it without ever looking back. If Chloe's journey out of the dark resonated with you, and if you found truth, depth, and strength in this story of reclaiming one's power, please take a moment to like and subscribe. We share these intense, profound narratives because we know how important it is to feel seen and to know that you are not alone in your fight for freedom. By joining our community, you help us bring more of these undeniable, life-changing stories to light. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and stay connected with us for more journeys of true resilience and triumph.